Okay, let's get started. I'll call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Corrections Partnership. We'll take roll call if we can go around, starting with Ms. Patterson.
Mike Moore.
Marcia Parsons.
Kate Ryman.
Elliot Robinson.
Jim Eager, Public Defender.
Berkeley Brannon.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
Sid Smith.
And Sid, you are here for Ray Bullock. You're taking,
Pardon?
are you taking Ray?
Ray Bullock.
Thank you. Ray is retiring, and we wish him the very best, of course. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
No, there are no additions or corrections to the agenda.
Thank you. I would like to remind the board members to turn off their mics if they're not speaking and to turn them on when they do speak.
Chair, I'm very sorry. I couldn't hear a word you're saying. If you can move the mic a little closer.
If you,
Thank you.
can you hear me out there? If you could remember to turn your mics off when you are not speaking and turn them on when you are speaking, that would be helpful. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'll take public comment on any items that are not on the agenda. Is there anybody in the public that would like to comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. We have approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of November 9th and the special meeting of November 30th. Pardon? Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Do we have any discussion, board discussion? Public comment on the minutes? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would suggest that Mr. Smith is abstaining because he was not at the last meeting.
That's correct. Actually, it would just be the 7-member executive board that would have voting privileges. Thank you. We'll go into our scheduled matters. The first matter is the quarterly statistical report. I'll ask Robin Rodriguez to come forward and present that report.
Good afternoon. This month's or this quarter's statistical report really didn't have any notable changes for the quarter. Mandatory supervision sentences were at 23%. All of our other quarterly stats are fairly, I mean, things kind of move up and down and have some fluctuation, but there was nothing that stood out about the quarterly report. So if anybody has any questions on it, I'd be happy to answer them.
Madam Chair, if it please the chair, I do have some questions, but some of them relate to the annual report and relating to the quarterly. So if it's permissible with the court, I'd rather wait until Ms. Rodriguez has a chance to give the annual as well.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
So for
Any further discussion from the board on the quarterly statistical report? Is there any public comment on the quarterly statistical report?
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Elliot Rockowitz-Roberts with the American Civil Liberties Union. First, I'd just like to say thank you, Robin, for the reports. I think they're really helpful. They're giving us more information, allowing us to see what's happening in the process, and also allowing us to ask the questions that need to be asked. And I was just wondering if it were possible to even make some of the information more refined. For example, on page 3, you comment that the number of unsentenced inmates reflects everyone in custody without a release date, including parole and probation violators. It might be helpful if we knew who the other people were also, the people who are unsentenced, since our figures tend to be high in that area. So if it's possible to include that information, that would be terrific. Also, on page 4, where you talk about unsentenced inmates released, the commentary is a judge or sheriff releases a defendant from custody without posting money bail. I think it would be helpful to know whether it's the sheriff or a judge who does that, because one of our concerns has been issues with bail in the county, so it would be really nice to know, in fact, where the releases are coming from. And then, also, I'm wondering if with the daycare center, there are any figures dealing with a recidivism rate. I think that might be helpful too, because the success rates seem so small in terms of people graduating. It might be helpful if we saw, are we in fact keeping people? That might be a figure which would be helpful in terms of evaluating the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further public discussion? Okay, close it. Robin? We'll now take up the annual report.
Okay. So I was going to give you just a very brief overview on this annual report. The purpose of this annual report wasn't just to update our statistical data and charts, but to capture the events, trends, and changes over the last year that have affected our county's implementation of the public safety realignment. We also hope to use this report to further educate the public about realignment and the different areas that it impacts. In terms of other state agencies and their collection of data and their efforts to evaluate recidivism, I took a look at the Board of State and Community Corrections to see if they'd made progress in the areas of studying recidivism and providing counties with the tools that they needed to look at that. And they did make some progress in the last year. They had developed a performance matrix that's specific to each county, and that's looking at reported crime, arrests, split sentencing, supervision, and incarceration rates. I had included, yes, it's looking at reported crime, arrests, split sentencing, supervision, and incarceration rates. And that's on page 3 of the report. And in Appendix A in the back of the report, I've included the actual matrix for Monterey County as they laid it out. In addition to that, the Department of Justice in the last year established a division of recidivism and reduction and reentry. And they are working on a tool that they call the California Recidivism Index tool. That's actually not available yet. Their website talks about it and references it, but there isn't anything yet for us to look at. But I'm hoping at some point that might be a tool for us. We also took a look at crime trends because we wanted to better understand crime trends in California versus those in Monterey and how that was being affected. And I looked at the last year. Primarily, the Department of Justice Office of the Attorney General has a website that they collect all of the different crime rates for California, and they look at them annually. So their last report was through 2014. And so we were comparing 2013 to 2014, and we found that overall reported property crime decreased in both California and Monterey County, but when we look specifically at Monterey County's categories of property crime, we can see that while burglary and theft decreased, vehicle theft increased. In looking at arrest data, both California and Monterey County had an increase in felony and misdemeanor arrests between 2013 and 2014. And the charts on page 10 show how the arrests for violent, property, and drug-related crimes were decreasing between 12 and 13, but they increased from 13 to 14, specifically in Monterey County. There's a lot of other charts and data on that are available to look at, but I'm not going to go into all of those today. In terms of our county statistics relating to AB 109 for the 14-15 fiscal year, we had an overall decrease in the jail population. We've had a decrease in the ratio of straight jail sentences to mandatory supervision sentences. And our PRCS population has remained fairly constant, while we've had a slight decrease in mandatory supervision cases. In terms of demographic data, for both PRCS and mandatory supervision, we've showed the data separately, whereas in the quarterly report, we merged those statistics. I've broken them out in this report so you can see differences. There are a couple of differences in the populations. Specifically, the mandatory supervision population has a higher percentage of females, and the average age of people being supervised on mandatory supervision is that they tend to be older. And we tried to take a look at recidivism. We still have a lot of limitations on measuring recidivism. However, we were able to calculate a cumulative rate for each population based on new convictions that are tracked by the district attorney's office. So specifically for PRCS, 39% of the total population that we've supervised has had a new misdemeanor or felony conviction. And for mandatory supervision, that rate was 29%. We devoted a fairly large section to community-based programs and treatment. And in the last, so this last section of the report is covering information about evidence-based practice and treatment. Program referrals are based on needs identified through the assessment and development of case plans. During the last fiscal year, 70% of all referrals made were for reentry and employment services. And lastly, it turns out that developing the internal infrastructure to collect, manage, and store case-related data specific to probation, as well as the service provider data, continues to be a lengthy process. With the probation department, we've implemented a quality assurance process to validate data being entered and queries to extract that data. We're still trying to build the actual infrastructure needed to warehouse static data used for reporting, and we're starting to identify additional technology needed to build analytical reports. In regards to our AB 109 providers, most of our contracted providers are entering data into efforts to outcomes, otherwise known as ETO. And we had implemented that in January of 2015. This has been an effective tool for tracking referrals, services provided, and outcomes of services received. Within the next year, we plan to shift our attention and reporting from program output, which is what we have right now in the quarterly reports, more to outcomes, which would measure, it would include more measurable goals and objectives. And in the next year, we're kind of hoping to make that shift now that we do have data in ETO. So are there any questions?
Questions or discussion from the board? Any questions or discussion from the board?
May it please the chair. Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Your reports are always useful, and I rely on them heavily. And my questions are not so much for Ms. Rodriguez as they are for what the data shows. And I drilled down a little bit on it and relied upon the data that was provided. I'm going to take it mostly in sequential order as the two reports are done. And I will note that one ends where the other begins. The 14-15 ends where the last quarter begins, October, November, December of 15. I did note that split sentences were down from October to December of 2015. Likewise, they were down in the quarter which preceded that. from July to October, so that's at least a 6-month decrease. All of the AB 109 split sentences for the county are still only 21%. I did note that tracking, as you described it, it is very important, and I think it's when trends, changes, and evidence-based programs to see what's working. And I did note that from July to September of 2015, after the after the annual report, as reported in the quarterly report, the jail population significantly increased up to 944. And for the quarter which followed that, and this is on page 3, the population again continued to rise, where it currently is at 900, or lastly was reported at, I think, 959 in December. I had a question, or well, I guess it's a question. I think it's something at some point we need to talk about, and I'm kind of in a quandary about it because as the public defender, I think the pretrial release program is something that we're very interested in, and we want to foster it. On the other hand, in terms of looking at how effective it has been, I have some serious questions, and I know that we have a grant that the court is working on. In October of 2015, there were only 6 pretrial releases ordered by the court. In November, this is pursuant to the probation department's recommendations. In November, there were only 3, and December, there were only 4. If you extrapolate, so that's a 3-month period. If you extrapolate that, that means there are a total for 14-15 of 37. That's about 1 a month. And I'm wondering, in terms of the bang for the buck, if we're getting value. I also note that in the pretrial services in 13-14, we had a much larger release rate than we did in 14-15. So it appears somehow between either the probation department and or the courts, the pretrial releases are certainly nowhere near where we want them to be, and I'm wondering what we're spending on the pretrial release program that's producing such modest results. I'm also, I noted in the data, and I have been somewhat in disagreement because I don't think the OR program was significantly expanded in terms of where those who were released before it was added to and those who were released after. But be that as it may, I note that in April of 2015, or in March, the OR releases were 204. In April, they were down to 96. More than 50% decrease. And the same is true for the work furloughs. In October of 2015, there were 220. In November of 2015, there were 209. In December, there were 140. And I'm concerned that ORs are more than half down in that period, that pretrial releases are of such disappointing numbers, and that work furlough likewise seems to be not used to its potential. I also note in terms of employment, and this is going to tie into something we'll talk about later, one of the requests that we made, with Turning Point in particular, from October to December of 2015, those who received fully subsidized work, there were 0. Those who received partially subsidized work, there was 0. Those who went out and got their own jobs, there was 11. 11 is very modest, but I'm wondering why is there a lack of success reported? And the same goes with some of the other programs. The Kickstart numbers are low. Same thing, the actual placements from October to December. 4 subsidized employment placements, 1 partially subsidized placement, and independent jobs were acquired a number of 20. Another area of our employment that, and I agree with, I'm sure all of us on the board agree that employment is an important part of reducing recidivism and promoting successful reentry. And I note that in the Rancho Cielo Construction Academy, from October to December, that 3-month period, there was only 1 successful completion. GEO, the day reporting center that Mr. Rukowitz inquired about, from October to December 2015, that quarter, there were 13 graduations. If you extrapolate that to a year, that's 52 graduations. That's 1 a week. For $1,080,000, I'm wondering if we might be able to do better. In terms of the jail, introspect was reported, and I want to reflect back to some questions that I had asked at the Special Budget Committee meeting, and I appreciate the chairs responding to those. My question was that I was requesting a breakdown and what portions are going towards programs for the Sheriff's Department, and I'd like to compare what is going on from programs to staffing and housing. And I did get a response on December 3rd, and that response was that the Sheriff's Department is receiving from the CCP $5,049,004. Of that total appropriation, $4,920,936 went to custody services, custody staffing, and medical services. The total amount that went to programs was only $128,000, approximately 2%. And that causes me great concern because, as reported in the annual report, and at one of the later pages, page 43, Monterey County Sheriff's inmate programs, it appears as if those are the only programs that are being provided. 6 months ago, I requested to know what programs were offered in the jail and was advised that that would be provided if possible. 3 months later, I hadn't received it and was late in requesting that it be placed on the agenda. But I'm very concerned that that 98% of the money from this program is being used for staffing and housing and medical, and such a small percentage is being used for programs. Turning to the annual report, I note that reflecting on the concerns raised by Chief Rodriguez at the last meeting about the overall focus for AB 109 and the Community Corrections Partnership, et cetera, was public safety. And it was very significant, I thought, in your report. Violent crimes reported from 2011 through 2014 are down, and the same is true for property crimes from 2011 to 2014. I am concerned, I mentioned about the increased population to the jail approaching the 1,000 level again. In the report, it does indicate on page 16, the annual report, that the jail doesn't have adequate room for programs, mental health, medical, and rehabilitation. I do note also that when we were discussing the $400,000 that had originally been approved for 2 modulars for and particularly for programs, that money was returned, and representations were made that the jail had enough room to do the programs. And I'm concerned that there's a significant inconsistency there. I'll talk about that when we get to the items dealing with that I've requested be put on for programs, but I wanted that, I think it's very significant, that discrepancy, and I think we have a right both to know what programs are being offered, what their populations are, as well as is this report that you did on page 16 accurate, that there isn't enough room for these programs. I do note also that split sentences were down in 14 and 15. I mentioned the ORs being down, pretrial releases. I also found it curious, and I don't know what to do about this because we don't have all the players here, and obviously, ultimately, this is a judicial decision. But in 2015, AB 579 was passed, which raised, if not a presumption, certainly a suggestion that all 1170H sentences were to be, the priority was, I may be phrasing this off a little, but the presumption was split sentences were preferred. And I was perplexed as I read, and I'm sure you were as you found them, that despite that legislative direction, there's been almost no impact on the split sentences in our county. So I guess the conclusion is, I think information is the coin of the realm. I think we make good decisions when we have accurate information. I have great confidence in you, Ms. Rodriguez, that the numbers you give us and collect are both accurate and thoughtful. And I think it's this committee's responsibility to use that data and that information wisely. And I have, I raise these because I'd like this to be discussed amongst the, certainly the voting members and also those who may not vote and who have other perspectives that would add to better decisions, and also members of the public. I think that the way we're using that money, and certainly the lack of accountability that we are demanding from those providers, can be improved. And I'm confident that with the intellect and interest and perspectives that we all offer, we can do a better job so that when we get the next quarter report, we won't have such disappointing areas that call for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eager. Any further discussion from the board? Comments?
Just a couple of points. On the, I think on the pretrial release program, I do think some of the comments there are well taken. I think we are going to have to take a look at that. I know in terms of the court's grant, as they're looking at pretrial release, I know Judge Butler, who presides there, and she's expressed the same sentiment. So I think that may come, and I think it's something that the committee should take a look at in terms of what the bang for the buck we're getting there. One thing I do know is that as a result of the research on that Sandra Gates is doing research for the court, and failures to appear are up 20%. If you look at 2014, Prop 47 went into effect end of 2014. If you take a look at 2014 and you compare 2015, they're up 20% this past year. And most of those failures to appear are obviously going to be folks that are OR, probably as a result of that legislation. Remember, what it did was it made a lot of felonies, drug possession, theft under $950. It made those crimes into misdemeanors. And so most of those folks are going to be OR. And sure enough, there are more failures to appear. I wish there was a way we could redirect funds to getting people to court, but that's a tough nut to crack. It's something that's being discussed with the courts committee. As far as the OR program, I do have a comment on that. The idea that the OR program wasn't expanded. The largest expansion of the OR program, and the reason jail numbers are down, the reason they're not at 1,100 anymore, or 1,150, and this was certainly, I suppose, intended, but it has to do with Prop 47. That's a huge OR program because folks are not being booked on misdemeanors. So you've got a huge selection of crimes where people aren't getting booked anymore, assuming they're even getting arrested on them. And so that obviously freed up some jail space. And again, with that, commensurate with that freeing up of jail space, you've got an increase in failures to appear. I think I think that in terms of OR, I think we're okay there. I don't think there's anything the system can do in terms of creating more ORs. I think that the last thing I would say is I think that although we wanted to, and it was really I would say as a result of this board that we pursued the pretrial release program. I think the genesis for it was here. I think I think that's why it came about. We put the money into it, and there's this thought out there that the folks that are being detained at the jail, for some reason, or the idea is that maybe they shouldn't be there. And I absolutely think that we need to figure out who's there. I think that Elliot's comment about how many of these people are on parole or probation, I can assure you those people are not going to be released by the court. I can absolutely assure you that. So if we're calling them unsentenced, or we're putting that in our pretrial release population, then we don't know what the number means. And he's absolutely right. That needs to come out of there. And that's a jail calculation, Mike. I don't know how you guys, these numbers come from you. So, if there's a way to separate that out, and the court's interested in looking at this population in terms of this pretrial study that they have a grant for that Mr. Eager referred to. And so I think finding out who those folks are, is something we've been talking about for a long time. But I can assure you, putting probationers and parolees who can't be released in that mix it makes the number junk. It's not Robin's fault. It's the number she gets from the jail, but it's not a useful number.
Thank you. Further discussion from the board?
Yeah, if I could just add real quick, we will have to look into fixing those numbers and taking the probation and parole and look at that. If I could also add that on the numbers, On our population in the jail, if you remember that last year about this time, we had roughly, and I'd have to go back, I don't know my numbers correctly, but 50 or 60 inmates up at Alameda County. And I think the last numbers were that we had 2 inmates up there right now. And our numbers at the jail were roughly in the high 800s. Now we're at about the mid 950s. We fluctuate back and forth on that. But almost all of those inmates, except for, again, about 2, were brought back from Alameda, and they are now in custody here. So, and then on the OR side of that, there are a lot of folks that we would normally consider OR, and I think, and again, I can't give you hard and true numbers right now, but I can say that with Prop 47 and some of those folks that would have normally stayed in on under the felonies, they're now, they get the misdemeanors, they get the failures to appear, and what we are seeing is what we think is a higher number of low bail warrants for misdemeanors, but the judges are putting no OR on there. So our hands are tied basically on that one. We can't OR if the judge says not to OR. And I think it's because they've FTA'd over a period of time. So I don't know the actual numbers, but we have seen an uptick in that.
May I
Thank you.
ask a micro question in regard to that in particular? Some time ago, we had a discussion where there was a conversation about calls regarding appearances going out. I've got a doctor's appointment on Wednesday, and I got a call from my doctor reminding me to come. Now, I'm not suggesting that my clients are scrupulous about calendar management, but I think we could do a lot better and get a lot of bang for the buck on these FTAs on relatively, well, if they're ORs, and if the FTAs are occurring on the ORs, I think it's low-hanging fruit, and I would urge, I guess that would be, I don't mean to give work to anybody in particular, but maybe that would be in probation's, I'm looking at you, Chair.
I understand that, Mr. Eager.
I don't know who it would be, and certainly I understand that there would need to be some resources, but I bet those resources would be less than officers in the street serving no bail hold warrants on Prop 47 type cases, which are not violent and have to do with substance abuse or lower grade theft.
Yeah, and and I'm sorry, were you going to respond? Or, Judge Butler has the same idea. And, she would love to set up some kind of system where we could call folks who have a court date, remind them. And the problem is, I think for probation, it may be that, we're talking about a lot of these people aren't supervised, they're not their clients. And we're going to, and but it's really something that she's interested in doing. And, I think it's just a question of, data entry, and then hopefully you've got the right data, and then you have an automatic call system, and it could work. And so I agree.
Thank you. Any further comments?
I think it would be helpful to see the information. Excuse me. I think it would be helpful to see the information in this report in a different graph or spreadsheet. I found myself flipping back and forth to see, how many services were provided, and the time periods didn't always match. But I think if we took an annual look at the amount of money in each category, who got it, behavioral health got it, or social services, what was provided, was it housing assistance, was it drug and alcohol, how many people received those services. So we're tracking it from the money. The money bought this, and specifically this was provided, and these many people were served with these kinds of services, and then the results that, 52 completed treatment, or 19 received rental assistance. But I don't think all of that information is in here. I think most of it is, but I had to flip back and forth to find it. So it just, for me to analyze that, I have to see it all on one page.
Okay. Further comments?
Just to note that, I think some of the information that would be really interesting, I know, is kind of contained in the evaluation that goes on, and which is separate from our annual report and our statistical report. But, I do think kind of, I remember from the evaluation report, kind of the notion of the number of services people receive is correlated with a reduction in recidivism. And so drilling down into that information at the evaluation is very important. I don't know that it belongs here because it is very detailed information, but I think that is, such an important feature of knowledge.
Any further board discussion? I'll open it up for public comment. Any public comment on the annual report?
Yes, just three things. One, just a concern. If you look at page 13, the allocation and planned distribution of funds, you'll notice that in the original year of 2011-12, supervision and detention alternatives had 36% of the budget, the largest amount. Now it's down to 25%, the lowest of the allocations, whereas incarceration has gone from 30% to 39%. And also treatment has gone down 4%. So if in fact we're concerned about alternatives to incarceration and reducing recidivism rates, shouldn't the money be going to those places? And maybe since the miscellaneous spending has gone from 0 to 6%, it might be helpful to list where that 6% is going. Secondly, with Mr. Eager, I share the concern about the drop in the number of pretrial supervision, especially when that has a high rate of success. But there's that dramatic drop from 73 to 37 in the last year, and then also the same for own recognizance. And then one final note on page 32, Ms. Rodriguez pointed out that the mandatory supervision program was noted because it had an older population and more females than males. But what struck me was in almost every other graph we have, Hispanics form the largest percent. And yet in this one graph, it's whites who have 45% of the mandatory supervision, whereas Hispanics only 41%. So that might be something to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment on the annual report?
Levon Stone. I haven't been here in a while, but we're still looking at some of the same old problems. We need community oversight or public oversight. There is still a big gap between the local community and the organizations and agencies who seem to be responsible for the initiation of the funds and the programs. There are a lot of organizations out there that are willing to help to pull some of this information together. We're talking about building community, not separating. And if we are not in touch with these people coming back in our community, and we just focus on the groups who are receiving funds to supposedly provide housing, transportation, training, jobs, care for these families, it's going to have to be a much broader structure in place. And I don't see that happening. But it has to happen because we must reduce what has been continuing to be a problem in our community. We're looking at building out development, bigger houses, all of this stuff where the money seems to be the most important. Just like what happened with Super Bowl up in San Francisco and increasing the homeless population, it all overlaps. There is no separate issues that is affecting the people in our community, no matter what their status is. So until we really look at doing something about that problem and not just focusing on this narrow area that we work in, it has to come together. Every single thing that is happening every single organization, every single agency, the problem is the same. It all overlaps. So something really has to be done in that order. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Eddy?
Hello, my name is McGregor Eddy. I'm the secretary for the Monterey County Jail Reform Coalition, and I just wanted to mention that in reflecting gentleman from the ACLU's concerns, the goal of the AB 109 is for CCP funds to be more or less 1/3 to support increased burden of incarceration at a county from a state level, 1/3 toward prevention, and 1/3 toward treatment, if I'm understood that correctly, and I have read the bill. And it seems that we're drifting away from that. We're drifting toward incarceration and away in our spending. And the second point, as brought up by Mr. Eager, is that our spending in prevention and alternative incarceration, we seem to be spending a very great deal of money for very few people. The GEO services, based on these statistics, are getting $1 million for 52 graduates a year. That's a lot of money. I think we could do much better than that. And I'd like to see our own probation department do it with our own employees, not for a for-profit out-of-state group. But those are my opinions, which you've heard before, but I just think I see a drift here that didn't used to be the case, and that I trust this committee to realign in the other meaning of the word. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further public comment? All right, I'll bring it back to the board. Is there any further board discussion? Okay, can we move on to the next agenda item?
A question, do we need to vote to receive the reports?
No, we just did receive it.
Thank you.
I think the next agenda item is the fiscal report. I'll ask Don Sosa, my finance manager, to present the item.
Good afternoon, Chair and other members of the CCP. In your package, there's a graph that was revised from the one presented on November 8th. Specifically, we received new information from the Department of Finance and the State Controller's Office to adjust the dollars for the current year projected fiscal year 15-16 and the growth funds. Those numbers have changed as a result of that information. And then additionally, we subtotaled the annual funding without the reserve to show the actual main allocation coming to the programs every year. And as noted in the staff report, you'll see that by comparing the annual funding line against the annual expenditure line, there is now a distinct diminishing return on the reserve. So that occurred first in fiscal year 14-15 and then continues on in the pattern. The expenditure data includes a 3% modest increase for projected years out for fiscal year 17 through fiscal year 20. Fiscal year 20 is a new add from the previous report to show the effect on the reserve and the expenses. The graph projects that the reserve will be fully spent by fiscal year 20, and that the budget as it is today with that modest 3% has an inherent structural deficit that will need to be addressed by the CCP in future planning. Currently, the staff is recommending that the CCP follow a conservative approach to budgeting with no increases to current service levels. Additionally, planning for future years needs to address the structural deficit that's built into the current budget with thoughtful alignment of services to the available funding level.
Thank you. Are there questions or discussion for Ms. Sosa from the board?
Just kind of one question and you don't have to answer it now, but I think as we get into kind of future year budgets, the annual expenditures actually by category compared to budget. And that's always kind of a useful thing as we think about kind of in the future, if we're over, if we're spending down the reserves such that we project a deficit in 1920, it's something that we'll have to pay a lot of attention to, how not to, how to make sure that doesn't occur, and that when we're making sure we're spending it both in the right places programmatically and understanding where expenditures are occurring versus underspending.
Thank you. Further comments from the board? Seeing none, I'll open it up to public comment. Is there any public comment? All right, thank you. Seeing none, I'll bring it back and we'll move on to the next agenda item, which I believe is Mr. Eagers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Public Defender has two items on the agenda. One is a request for funding for an attorney and legal assistant. I do want to, before I go into the reasoning and the services, I wanted to amend and correct the amounts that are mentioned on the bottom of page 1 of 1. They were done on November 4th, 2015, and they did not include all the benefits of the positions. So the FTE Public Defender 2 is to be corrected at 143,704, and the legal assistant is to be, the correct amount is 84,563. One of the big issues that we are struggling with, and that we've been talking about today, has to do with employment, whether it's training or subsidized or partially subsidized, that's such a critical part of reintegration into society, whether it's the mandatory supervisees or the PRCSs. And on page 43, Ms. Rodriguez was good enough to identify some of the areas where we're focused: Kickstart, Turning Point, Rancho Cielo. And it begins with, I think, a real truism that criminal convictions and incarcerations bring with it a host of sanctions and disqualification that can place an unanticipated burden on individuals trying to reenter society, et cetera. Whether it's being able to care for your family or get current on child support or provide transportation, to care for health, et cetera. And one of the biggest impediments is having a criminal conviction, having to disclose that and the contamination it brings with it. I believe the federal government, and I don't recall the name of it, but they even have a program where the employers don't ask about prior criminal convictions until the candidate has been vetted, so that there isn't that stigma attached. Before I came over today, I wanted to know where the Public Defender's Office is on terms of the expungement, which we do. And for those who don't know, there are provisions of the Penal Code which allow people who have been convicted of a crime, completed their probation, honored all court requirements, fines, fees, et cetera, served whatever punishment has been indicated, to come back and to petition the court after review by the district attorney to have their records expunged. And that makes a huge difference in their ability to get employment. I won't I won't bring out the violins, but I'll just say we have a very modest, the resources provided to the public defender in the county are modest. We've tried to do what we could with volunteers, but as of today, we have a backlog of 557 open files, requests from people who would like to have the relief on their criminal records. And if they're responsible enough to come in to request that and have behaved themselves such that they're eligible, it seems to me to make a lot of sense that we would go a long way to preventing recidivism by facilitating that. Likewise, Prop 47 that has been referenced by my colleague from the district attorney and has a provision which retroactively changes the criminal status of certain designated offenses, mostly drug possession and influence-related cases, and thefts under $950. And likewise, that would be very helpful, and I've spoken publicly to different locations in the county for people who are eligible for that. And that's a real exigent matter, because when that legislation was passed, it had a 3-year window. And if you're eligible for it, you can come back and ask to have that felony offense reduced, but you've only got 3 years to do it. And we have some significant obstacles to overcome in being able to facilitate that for the full number who may be eligible within our county. So between the 126 outstanding Prop 47 cases and the 557 open files, as the other departments in the county, we just can't provide those services, and I think it would be money very well spent. I do know that other agencies in the criminal justice system have increased the services that they're able to provide under their mandates, whether it's caring for victims and their needs, increased probation, supervision, et cetera. We have thus far not made any requests in the coming up on 5 years, but our staff has remained unchanged for a number of years, and I can't rely on volunteers or clerks or law students on all of these. We do need at least one attorney and a paralegal or legal assistant to assist us in this effort. So that was the genesis and the intent in asking for that help from the fund balance that the CCP has.
Thank you. Board discussion, comments?
You know, I do have a few comments on this. You know, we do, the district attorney and the public defender, you know, our duties are somewhat parallel in this particular area. And I'll explain those in a little bit so that people understand what it is. But before I get to that, you know, we do, the district attorney and the public defender, we do get money from the state for realignment that does not go through CCP. And that amount for the state is going up by $6.9 million this coming fiscal year. The amount that the district attorney and the public defender got in 2014, 2015, if you compare it to 2016, 2017, it's about twice as much. So our allocation that comes from the state directly for realignment has been going up, and it's going to go up according to the governor's budget summary. So this, I don't know that this has been passed, but this is from the 2016-27 budget summary. That will go up. So we are getting additional monies for this. You know, Prop 47 is going to sunset. So we're about halfway through this process, and when I say this process, what we're talking about here, in terms of the request, we're talking about folks who were convicted of a felony before the law went into effect, and because the law went into effect in November of 2014, they're eligible to have that felony conviction reduced to a misdemeanor. And so there's a process for it. And they have 3 years to do that, and we're about halfway through right now. And so I thought it would just be, worth the committee seeing, and with the permission of the chair and Ms. Ryman, I have copies for the public too, but I have a list of all of the Prop 47 petitions that we've received since the law went into effect. And I think that's enough for the board up here, and I'm just going to put these down here. If the chair will indulge me. Anyone wants to see it. And so, as you might, sorry about that. As you might expect, most of the folks that applied for petitions, did so right after the law went into effect. And if you look at the first 4 months there, and I'll describe this petition process in a minute, but this is how you get your relief, and this is the task that is in terms of the budgeting that's being requested here. About 56% of the 1,171 petitions that have been processed by the court occurred in the first 4 months. After the law went into effect. So there's folks out there that wanted the relief, and they applied for it. And I'll show you what this is, but I mean it's a one-page form, so a person could do this on their own, and many people do on their own. The number of petitions that we've been getting more recently is a lot lower, as you can see. Now, we're not through February, and I think December is probably atypical because of the holidays, but you can see November, January, and there were more in January because there weren't as many in February, or sorry, in December. But we're talking, they're coming in right now at I mean, you can see the numbers there, but it's probably averaging, I don't know, 30, 40 a month maybe. I can assure you in terms of, and I'll describe what this is, but I mean, it's just not something that, at least from what I understand in terms of our function, I mean, it's not something that would require an attorney or a full-time paralegal or both. I mean, it wouldn't. We've obviously absorbed these 1,071 petitions just within our office, and this is what you have to do to fill this, to work this. So you understand what we do with these. There's a petition. It's a one-page petition. It looks like this. It has some boxes on it. And what the person is being asked to do here is give the person's name and then say what they got convicted of. And they're saying that they're eligible for this relief. So if it's a theft under 950, those are going to take longer, and I'll explain why. If it's a drug offense, drug possession, it's going to be, if that's what they got convicted of, they're going to get the relief, assuming there's no disqualifier. And there are a few things in terms of, sex registrant that would disqualify. But it's a quick check of their record, and what they do is they fill out this form, this one-page form, and I appreciate that the public defender is helping them do this, and the public defender is doing some screening, and telling some folks, hey, you're not going to get relief. But if the public defender, if according to their file review, they are going to get relief, they fill out the form, it goes to the court, and the court sends the form to us. And then what we do is we pull the file, we look at the person's record, we see if the person qualifies. Most of the time, the answer is yes, no objection. The form goes to the court, and the relief's granted. And nobody appears in court. Nobody does anything. That's what happens. The ones where we do get court appearances are where there's an issue over the 950. Was the theft under 950 or over 950? So we would look at our records. We'd say, according to our records, it's over 950. If the court wants to have a hearing, we'd have one. There's no way that I don't based on what, talking to folks in my office, there's no way 10% of these get to court. And so that's the process. It's something that a person could do on their own if they wanted to. We're going to have to review it, so we're going to be checking to see if the criteria are there. I definitely appreciate having the public defender involved in the process. It's very valuable. It saves us time, and it's a good thing. But I couldn't come here knowing what we do, and essentially, they're talking to these folks, and they're looking at their file, and then it comes to our office, and we're looking at our file, and then we're both going to the court. I mean, I couldn't come in here and ask for those positions. There's just not something I could do. It does not take that level of time. I think the bottom line is, for me, unless the pot is growing, any request is a zero-sum game. And so any request that we look at, we have to look at that in terms of our overall budget. We have to decide where we're going to cut if we were going to spend money. And we can't do it without looking at the rest of the budget. We're already going to be cutting anyway. And I think that something like this we have to look at in the overall context of the whole budget. And I just don't think we can ever, going forward, agree to fund something piecemeal. And the sheriff may remember that the sheriff asked for money, and we didn't grant it, and I made a similar speech. So my position hasn't changed.
Thank you. Further comments from the board? I would like to make a comment. I can't support this for a variety of reasons.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
I cannot support this request for a variety of reasons. The first one being that we just had a fiscal report from our finance manager that shows that we're going to be facing some very, very difficult budget years. And I do know also that the county is going to be facing a very, very challenging budget year this year. I'm not sure that these populations that are being served by these two positions are AB 109 offender populations rather than just offender populations in the general criminal justice system. The public defender receives a separate allocation, as Mr. Brannon noted, to deal with the excess workload of AB 109. I'm not saying it's adequate. Our allocation is not adequate, but he does receive a separate fund. These two positions, if we brought them on, I don't know how we could sustain them in the future. They're two full-time positions, and the sustainability would be a difficult challenge for us, I think. I think this is a more appropriate request to be placed before our budget office and perhaps work through the county budget process. Did you wish?
I did, thank you. The district attorney did not mention the overwhelming majority of what the work is, which is the expungements, the 557 cases that do need to be researched and presented, which is the elephant in the room. As to the Prop 47 cases, the reasons they have gone down are twofold. One is the initial 3 months were the low-hanging fruit, where we were able to identify persons who are eligible. We don't have that ability now, nor have we had the ability to capture that population. But I don't want to be diverted by a straw man, because the thrust of our argument is much more focused on the expungements than it is on the Prop 47. I do note that the money that the state provided for public defenders and district attorneys, which is exactly equal, was because of the added responsibility that we were all given to do what formerly had been parole hearings, which we are now doing in our departments. I will note, and I don't want to get off the key point. But our service population, the attorneys in our office are the same as they were in 2010. In that same time, the district attorney's office has grown by 6. Our investigator staff, which we use especially on the Prop 47 cases to hunt down these people, we have 7. District attorney has 33. They added 4 last year. Our investigator staff has not grown since 1999. So it is a bit of the fox guarding the hen house, trying to minimize the work that we have before us, challenging us while they expand, and we add responsibilities without resources. And as for the last point about not knowing whether or not these are AB 109 clients, I raised that very same question in regard to the use of funds for inmates in the jail and was told that the Community Corrections Partnership is not restricted in the services provided to defendants who fall within the AB 109 parameters, whether they are mandatory supervisees or PRCSs. So to raise that at this point seems to me to be very significantly, it's inconsistent. And I appreciate the chair's suggestion that we go to the Board of Supervisors, and I know that we have representatives of the CAO's office and present in the room. And we've been trying to do this so we could provide these services for the last 6 years. And thus far, it has, we're at the bottom of the totem pole. So I don't have any place else to go to try and do this. And bearing in mind that the issue has to do with expungements more than Prop 47, but those Prop 47 cases are important, and we don't have a list of all those people who would be eligible, and some of those cases go back many years, long before I was in the county, and I've been here 10. So I appreciate the chair's fiscal concerns and workload boundaries, and I also appreciate the focus from the district attorney, although I disagree with it, that the public defender's work on these matters is ministerial, and I'll submit it for a vote.
Thank you. Public comment on the request by the public defender to fund 2 positions in his department.
It's very important to provide the services that are needed to the people who are waiting so that they can get on with their lives. And since the Public Defender's Office represents this public, I think that steps need to be made to get the work done. And if the volunteers or pro bono help is not available, then I think the county should find the funds to get it done. I don't see the budget for the county of Monterey. I know there's a lot of exotic things going on, but it's time now to put some of this focus on the people who are waiting for the services that should be provided to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Is there any further discussion? Is there a motion?
Move that the request be approved.
Is there a second? Seeing none, the motion fails for lack of a second. The last item on the agenda is yours also, Mr. Eager.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I am requesting that the $400,000 which was returned to the fund and had previously been approved for the structure of 2 modulars at the current jail be redirected for use on inmate programs in the jail. I think there's, I find it very troubling that $128,000 out of almost $5 million is all that goes to inmate programs. I also want to take advantage of what the Sheriff's Department has indicated is adequate room in the current jail to provide these programs. I think we've heard discussions today about I'm sorry, let me go back. In terms of the change direction and the decrease of funding that's being appropriated towards treatment, I think it has been rediverted towards supervision and incarceration, and I think little in way of doing what really works is being done for in-custody folks. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity, whether it's substance abuse, employment services, computer skills, anger management. We have the money sitting there that was taken. And I did also want to reflect on the allocation of that money originally. It wasn't $400,000 that the sheriff was requesting, and it was a half of a page request for a modular unit that had not been vetted and was brought forward, and on the fly, this group doubled that amount, and instead of it going for 1 modular unit, it went for 2 modular units. And we were, the project was nursed along, and we were given information that I don't think was accurate or reliable as to what the plan was, what the progress was. At first it went from one type of building to another, and then it was going to be on concrete, and then we were going to expedite the plumbing. The reason I bring this up is not to beat a dead horse, but to say that it's been the practice of this commission to allow some flexibility for programs and allocations that meet at least a majority of support. I think we see from the annual report as well as the quarterly report today, there's a dearth of programs being offered in the jail. Again, I renew the request to know if there are any others. I assume they would have been included in the report, but there was only the introspect and the services included in that. So I feel very comfortable in asking that steps be taken to review the programs that are currently being offered, to review the census that are being offered in the Sheriff's Department, and to support the Sheriff's Department in providing those programs for in-custody inmates. We had this discussion at some length when Dr. Clark was here from Behavioral Health. I think this is an opportunity to improve the outcomes which we've seen in an area where there is a crying shortage And so I'd ask your support for this motion.
I have this down as a non-action item, Mr. Eager.
Well,
Just
There are no specific programs being...
well, no, I'm asking that, just as we in the past have given some parameters, and whether it's a working group, I don't want to lose this motion on some sort of, I certainly want to comply with the law, and I think I did. I asked that this matter be offered for consideration and appropriation of the $400,000. I agree that it needs to be done in steps. I agree also that we need to know what programs, what the census of the programs is. So I'm not suggesting that a check be written, but it is a fool's errand to talk about reducing recidivism and to try and integrate folks back into society, and whether it's not help them with employment or not provide the training that they would benefit from and treatment in custody. So
If I could just interrupt here, I have a question for County Council. The programs in the jail are presently a topic of pending litigation, and my feeling at this time is that it's inappropriate for this board to weigh in on that at this time, but I would like your opinion on that.
It is true that the county is in the midst of litigation affecting the jail and jail programs, but I think that based in part upon what you said earlier, I agree, based in part upon the actual documentation written here, I don't see an action that you're actually requesting other than to discuss funding options. If you have a specific suggestion about where funds should be going, maybe that should be part of the budget meeting that I think you're going to be having coming up. But I don't see the recommendation action to be taken in your board memo says discuss funding options for inmate programs, and then as to how far you can discuss that without impeding the ongoing litigation is a question. And then the other statement was survey of jail programs currently being offered and consider enhancing those programs. Again, there's not a specific action that would alert the board or the public as to what it is that you want to do. And so,
well, in that regard, I see Ms. Blitch is here, and she is lead county counsel on the Hernandez case, which is the jail litigation case. And it's a public document that the programs touted by the county being provided to inmates depend heavily on the CCP providing the resources and the efforts for those programs to be brought to reality. So on the one hand, we have the county saying, well, the CCP is working on it. On the other hand, we have the CCP saying, well, nope, we're not going to get involved in that because that's federal litigation.
I'm sorry, Mr. Eager, I don't think you correctly understood what I was saying. I'm not saying that, and I will also note that you are a party to that litigation. I think that...
I am not a party to that litigation. I am counsel to that litigation.
Counsel to that. Thank you. I stand corrected. But I think in point of fact, there is no action scheduled for this matter. There may be a discussion, and I will leave it to the sheriff's office and their counsels to what they think they can discuss, because as I understand, litigation is pending and it's not been settled yet, so there are certain things that should not be discussed in an open session.
Can I-
But in the meantime, I guess you have a question.
I did just, yeah, question, comment, something like that. You know, the litigation, the kind of technicalities of doing this now, kind of immaterial for me. I mean, I prefer to not do anything right now, but I would like to, when we have a budget discussion, I do think that programming in the jail is important. You know, it's important to prepare people for release, and so I'm supportive of the concept. I know in the past we've had issues with space, we've had lots of issues, and I don't want to kind of second guess what those are. I don't know if they're appropriate to bring here or not, but to the extent there's capacity to bring programs into the jail, to prepare people for release, to give them both the education, the mental health support, the substance abuse support, and the employment readiness support, I think that's very valuable. I know we're working together on some veteran services, and I think that those are great things because they help people be prepared for when they leave. On the other hand, I also look at, you know, the change in the year-end reserve between 13-14 and 14-15 was roughly $942,000. So we're starting that downhill slope on programming, and we'll have to make some decisions about what's sustained, what's not sustained. And so my request is that when we get to budget, that we actually have some sort of meaty, lengthy budget workshop that gives us time to really think about these issues. Because I think there's a lot that we should think about when you look at this kind of, you know, when you're spending down your reserves, you really got to think about your priorities, particularly if you're looking at deficit in 3 years. So that's would be my request, that we actually, you know, either next meeting or meeting after that, sometime before we actually prepare our final budget for the Board of Supervisors, we have a real budget workshop as a community corrections partnership.
Thank you.
The undersheriff had a question.
No, not really a question. I kind of want to go back on some of the things you said to clear up historically, because you were talking about the disingenuous way that I think the money was given for the modulars and how much was given for the modulars.
That was not my words,
Well,
sir.
I can't remember the word you used, but there was something sneaky about it, it sounded. And I will say that when the new sheriff took over this administration, that money had already been allocated for those modular programs. We looked at ways, and we were trying to work on whatever plans had already been done with those. And I think I even came to this committee, or to the CCP myself, and explained some of the things we were trying to do in order to use those funds the way that they were supposed to be used. It was later that we found that it was going to be 12 months, and there were some other things, and really we weren't going to be able to build those modulars and use them with the jail expansion and everything else that was occurring. I do want to say that this is probably the first time I think everybody's wanting to throw money at the sheriff's office, and we didn't ask for it. And we are opposed to this. I'm opposed to using any of that $400,000 which we gave back, which was in good conscience. It wasn't money we could use, and we didn't want to waste it and thought we could use it some other place in the CCP. The programs that we continually talk about and that you're going off of on the statistical reports and the quarterly reports is Introspect, and that's what's in there. And Introspect, I believe I'm correct on this, Introspect is where the CCP monies are used to pay part of that contract with Introspect. And Introspect does a lot of our substance abuse, some cognitive skill training, and some of those other trainings. We also use money from our inmate welfare fund for programs that isn't reported to the CCP because it's money that is used from our inmate welfare fund. We also have partnerships with some of the groups in the community, Peace Activists and some of the others. Salinas Union Adult High School comes in and does GED and stuff. So there's a lot of programming that is going on in the facility that's done at no cost through community service. Some of it's paid through IWF, the Inmate Welfare Fund, and then, of course, Introspect is the other part of that. We keep getting caught up on this adequate space, and I think we're quibbling over words. Is it adequate for what we would like to do? No, probably not. But we're moving things around, and we're reorganizing and making space. Not for this quarterly report, but at least for the next one, we collaborated with Monterey County Probation and with the GEO Group BI, and we just did on January 28th, we did a huge job fair inside the jail, and that was the first one we had done, and I give full credit to Charles De Silva and the whole programs unit over at the jail. They did a fantastic job with that. Again, that's not money out of the CCP. That was a collaboration that we did. So but we have programmings, and also in that same document that you've read from, there was a sentence in there that said this last year we've added an enormous amount of programs above what we had before, and that's what we're continuing to do. I don't think I need to touch on the litigation so much, but there will be reporting on that in the future as well.
Thank you.
Well, the handwriting is clearly on the wall, and even with hearing impairments, I can hear how this is going. Ms. Ryman, you brought up limitations and wondered whether things were on there for actions. We may disagree on the appropriation of funds for that, but certainly there is a sentence here that we should have a survey of jail programs currently being offered in the jail and consider enhancing those programs and funding additional programs. 6 months ago, I tried to get a survey of what those programs were and who's participating in that. I again renew that request. I think that is an action item here and was noticed. And I'm again asking for that information.
Is there further board discussion? I'll open this item up to public comment. I don't believe I've done that yet. Public comment on the last item on the agenda.
Yvonne Stone, I would like to say again, there's not enough public inclusiveness. Whoever retrospect or introspect is, that's fine. There are a lot of groups. These funds should be spread around throughout the community, not just the favorite ones. So somebody really needs to look at how the training and whatever's going on in the jail. I would like to have a report of those groups involved and exactly what kind of programs they are, not just hear somebody talk about them. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Is there any further discussion? Does anybody want to make a motion?
I will make two motions. One is in connection with the funding, and I'll submit it on that. The other has to do with the notice request for survey of jail programs currently being offered and the participants in those programs. I can't imagine why there would be hesitancy to reveal what it is that's being done specifically. And I think that the CCP could benefit from that information as we look forward to the budget hearings that Mr. Robinson was referring to.
Could you frame your first motion a little bit more specifically
Sure.
for us?
That $400,000 be used to enhance programs for inmates at the jail, one. Number two, that there be a survey of jail programs currently being offered in the jail so that we may know what those programs are and the number of inmates that are benefiting from them.
All right, two motions have been made. We'll take the first one first. Do I have a second? Motion fails for lack of a second. The second motion, again, is the request for a survey of all programs in county jail.
Inmate programs.
And was there a second part to that?
Inmate programs and the number of participants.
Okay. Do I have a second? Motion fails for lack of a second.
Can I just
Thank
ask
you.
a question? Is it too late? I don't know, Council. Just because I'd love, some of that information would be nice to have. I just don't want to do it in the form of a binding motion. I'd love to have that collaboratively.
Absolutely, I agree. I think that concludes our business. We will be having a special budget meeting on February 29th at 2 o'clock here in the chambers. We're entering a challenging budget year. My recommendation off the top is that we do not increase service levels. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.